Okay, so this is the 8th grade ECA review. In this review, I will provide the vocabulary that will help you be prepared for the ECA review. Not necessarily will all this vocabulary be on the review, but being familiar with it will certainly be helpful. And then this is vocabulary that you will need for the vocabulary post-test, which you will also be taking. I will go through it rather quickly. You can pause, rewind, and write down things as you find necessary on your study guide. It will not particularly be that I'll go in order. I'll try to go in order as well as I can on the vocabulary. I know on the concepts, some of the things are out of order, but again, you can just pause and find it on your study guide. So let's begin with vocabulary. Investigation, experimentation that scientists participate in to test predictions and hypotheses. Prediction, a statement regarding the outcome of an experiment based on previous information or educated guesswork. Observation, the information collected regarding experimentation that involves using your senses. This generally involves seeing, hearing, touching, and collecting data. Inference, a conclusion based on observations or what is already known. Evidence, observations or data to support a statement, hypothesis, or point of view. Opinion, a personal belief not based on evidence or data. Control, part of an experiment that is not changed and remains the same in order to determine the experimental effects. Data, information gathered from an experiment or investigation. Genes, a specific sequence of DNA that determines one or more traits. Variable, the factor which is changed in an experiment either by the scientist or as a result of the experiment. Chromosomes, a strand of DNA that contains the genes that store hereditary information. Environmental changes, changes in the environment that can impact life, such as pollution. Populations, a group of the same species of organisms living in a specific location or habitat. Natural selection, a process in which individuals with certain traits that give them a better chance for survival and reproduction pass their traits on to the next generation at a greater rate than individuals with less adaptive traits. Now, I will tell you, natural selection comes from our evolution unit, and we may or may not get to that point this year, but often there are questions on the ECA regarding this particular term, and I do know that you need to know it for the vocab test. So, natural selection. Adaptation, again, this is from the evolution unit. An adaptation is an inherited characteristic that increases an organism's chance for survival or reproduction. So in other words, if they have this adaptation, this genetic mutation that is a positive trait or mutation, that will allow for natural selection, which then allows certain groups to be able to reproduce and grow and develop at a better rate than those. We call it survival of the fittest. That's probably what you're most familiar with. Okay, mutation. Also, this goes along with genetics, but mutations can cause adaptations over time. A mutation is the change in the DNA of a gene that can lead to a different trait. Now, we talked about in studying genetics that mutations can be good, they can be bad, and in some cases they can have neither effect. Sexual reproduction, the process which results in the creation of offspring involving two parents. Asexual reproduction, the process which results in the creation of offspring involving only one parent. DNA, a long double helix molecule present in chromosomes that contain genes. Genetics is the study of heredity. Sorry, that's spelled wrong. Condensation, the process of change in the state of water in the water cycle from a gas to a liquid. Precipitation, the movement of water in solid and liquid form from the atmosphere back to the surface of the earth. Rain, snow, sleet, and hail are examples. Atom, the smallest unit of matter. Element, a collection of atoms of one type. Periodic table, an arrangement of elements according to their atomic numbers so that elements with similar properties are in the same column. Chemical reaction, a process during which a substance or substances changes into one or more new substances. Weather, the condition of the atmosphere including temperature, precipitation, and cloud cover at a particular place and time. Atmosphere, the gases that surround a planet or moon. Water cycle, the movement of water in a solid, liquid, or gaseous form, another typo, from the atmosphere and back to the surface of the earth. Evaporation, the process of change in state in the water cycle from liquid to gas. And those are all of our vocabulary. So now we're going to move to Smart Notebook, and we're going to take a look at the concepts that you will need to understand in order to take the 8th grade ECA. And first off, this is basically an answering how to answer questions. This is not something that we've seen before, but it's not difficult, and I want to explain how it works. So the ECA will, in often cases, give you a multiple choice question, and then it will have a writing prompt afterwards. And the writing prompt will say, explain why you chose your answer and why you did not choose one other answer. So I'm going to give you an example of how you might go about answering that question. So for instance, what color is the sky when the sun is shining? So this would be how you would answer this. And we are this year using CER. So any of the questions that have explain why you chose one or why you did not choose another, or explain with the trade-off, make sure that you use CER. So we know the answer is blue, but here is how we would go about answering that question fully. So it says, when the sun is shining, the sky is blue. I know this because when I look outside and the sun is shining and there are no clouds, the sky is blue. I didn't choose black because the sky is only black at night when the sun isn't shining. Based on the evidence of my observations, I know that the sky is blue and not black or green when the sun is shining. So let's take a look at what we've done here. First, we've made our claim. So our claim is, when the sun is shining, the sky is blue. So that's our claim. Now, what's our evidence for that claim? So we'll pick a different color here. Our evidence is, I know because when I look outside and the sun is shining and there are no clouds, the sky is blue. Now, we also, in addition, cited where we got that evidence. We got it when we look outside. So do make sure that you cite where you get your evidence. And in this case, it's actually from yourself. And then you need to explain why you didn't choose another. And so that would be here. I didn't choose black because the sky is only black at night when the sun isn't shining. And again, we're assuming that that's because you've been looking outside. So there's a second piece of evidence cited when you look outside. Then it says, based on the evidence of my observations. So we've made our claim. We've cited our two pieces of evidence, our evidence of what it is and what it isn't. And then we have added our reasoning. So based on this evidence of our observations, we know that the sky is blue and not black or green when the sun is shining. And that would be our reasoning. Now, using 4, 3, 2, 1, that would be probably a 3. Doesn't really go above and beyond, but remember, on the CERs for the ECA, if you get a 3, that means you get full credit. If you get a 4, if you go above and beyond, then you actually get a half a point extra credit. So a 3 is full credit for the ECA. Now, you might ask, well, how would I get that? Well, you would go in and you would give a little bit more information. What about a green sky?
Actually, there are sometimes green skies. Green skies come before a storm. So you might add something else. You might bring in some other observation or some information from a chart. And then that would get you a 4 for a CER.
Okay, then scientific observations. So you're going to find that most of the things that we cover for the ECA are going to be more scientific processing skills than actual factual data concepts that you have to remember. So what makes a good observation? Well, a good observation is something where you use your senses. So it's not based on opinion, hearsay, but based on things that you have used with your senses. So physical properties are one good type of scientific observation. Physical properties can be counted or observed using your senses, and they do not involve a chemical reaction. So things like color, state, is it a solid, liquid, or a gas, its size, its hardness, its luster, its flexibility. We did a lot of physical properties when we studied chemistry. And then chemical properties, okay? So chemical properties are also good observations to be listed. Chemical properties are a result of a chemical reaction. So a chemical has to have reacted with another chemical, and then in that process, you could see a change in color, a formation of a new chemical, bubbling, heating, cooling. Those are just a few. Release of gas. Those are chemical properties. All right, then density. And in density, we learned that the formula for density is density equals mass, the mass of an object, divided by its volume. Okay? Density equals mass divided by volume. And we discovered that something that is more dense than something else will sink. So if something's more dense than water, it will sink in water. And something is less dense, it will float in water. And that is dependent on the mass of the object and the volume. But the density itself will not change for an object. So as an object gets bigger, not only does its mass increase, but its volume proportionately increases. Thus, the density never changes. So if we take a density of a block this size and we say it's 5 grams per centimeter, or I'm sorry, per milliliter, and then we cut this in half, it's not a very good half, the new object would still have a density of 5 grams per milliliter. And it would still sink in water because we know that the density of water is 1 gram per milliliter. Okay, that's about all you need to know for density for this test. Mostly it's going to be related to the vocabulary test. All right, moving right along. Chemical reaction. So we talked about a chemical reaction. Went back, if we look back here at the chemical properties, chemical reactions are the formation of a new substance when two or more substances form together to create a new product. Signs of a chemical reaction: color, change in color, formation of a new chemical, bubbling, gas being produced, heating, cooling, those types of things. So those are chemical reactions. We also talked a great deal about the life cycle of a product. Now, you will need to understand the concepts of a life cycle of a product. I would encourage you to go back in your textbook or in your notebook and look up the life cycle of a product. But just to kind of give you a refresher, we have the beginning of life in the life cycle of a product, where we have the raw materials. Where do we get those? Do we get those from the ground? Are those man-made? Those kinds of things. What kinds of energy is required to get them from the ground? What kind of energy is required to transport them? Then they are transported to a manufacturing facility where they then are turned into whatever it is that we're going to use. We looked at plastics, metals, and glass, and those things can be used for bottles. They can also be used for any kinds of things, electronics that we manufacture. Then it has its useful life. That's when we use it. It goes to the store, goes out on the shelf, we use it in our home. And then our end of life, and our goal with end of life is to reuse, recycle, reduce the amount of waste that goes into the landfill, but certainly some of the end of life involves products going to a landfill. Okay, experimental design. Now you will be required to create a lab setup, just like we've done lab write-ups. Not just list what makes a good design, but also write the lab up. So you'd be given a scenario. The first thing would be the purpose. So you're going to go and you're going to look at the scenario. What is it that they're asking you to set up? We looked at our challenge question. So what is the purpose of the experiment? Then you're going to make a prediction or a hypothesis. What do you expect the outcome of this experiment to be? What kinds of safety? If we're working with chemicals, we're going to have safety goggles, make sure we keep our hands away from the chemicals, wash our hands, get directions, those kinds of things. Materials, I will tell you there's not going to be any kind of question that you wouldn't have an idea of what kinds of materials. All of the materials that wouldn't be needed would be things that you'd be familiar with. Procedure, so step by step, what are you going to do? And remember, we're not writing this for an 8th grade student who's at the end of their 8th grade year. We're thinking about, could a 4th or a 5th grader read these procedures step by step? A data collection device. So if you think back when we worked with plastics, we made a table and we looked at the different properties of the table, flexibility, hardness, reaction with acid, and then we recorded the results. So that would be a data collection device. And then finally a conclusion. Now, you aren't going to be performing the experiment, you're just going to be writing up the experiment. So what kinds of questions would be good questions to ask? Those are our analysis questions, and you will need to create an analysis question for the experiment that you are doing. All right, then weather versus climate. Now, you probably need to go back to your notes. You can go back to the Prezi. I did go over the definition of weather, but we understand that weather is the conditions in a certain place at a certain time. Those conditions can involve things like precipitation. They can involve things like temperature. They can involve things like wind speed. I'm not going to write them all down because it takes me too long to write with a mouse, but precipitation, wind speed, temperature, wind direction, humidity, air pressure, those are things that are involved in weather. Climate is the weather in a certain region over a long period of time. So climate is generally regional, whereas weather is more local. Local and day-to-day, climate being regional and over a long period of time. Okay, now I did mention when we went through the vocabulary that we may or may not get all the way through our evolution unit. So again, just as a refresher, mutations are a change in the DNA of a gene that can lead to a different trait. And we know from studying genetics that those mutations can be bad, they can also be good, and they can also have no consequence. If they are good and they tend to make an organism be able to perform and live better, and that organism can then reproduce and create new offspring, passing on that good mutation, then we can be involved in something called natural selection. And natural selection is a process in which individuals with certain traits, based often on a mutation, that give them a better chance for survival and reproduction, pass their traits on to the next generation at a greater rate than individuals with less adaptive traits. So the other individuals have traits that haven't adapted, don't make them survive, don't make them produce as many offspring. These traits then increase in the population, and over time this results in the inherited characteristics of the population. Now, so what then happens is what we call survival of the fittest. Those who have inherited possibly a mutation, they've adapted, they've been able to reproduce and pass it on, then they survive. And those with the less adaptive traits then do not. And that is natural selection. So nature, through the process of these mutations, good mutations being passed on, will then survive at a better rate. Okay, sexual and asexual reproduction. Hopefully we're familiar with this. We studied this in genetics. Which organisms? Okay, so Generally, single-celled organisms produce asexually because that's just one parent, but hopefully you do remember the strawberry plant produces asexually, but that just means one parent. So there's no variety because they get the exact same genetics unless there's a mutation. Sexual reproduction involves two parents, so you get half your DNA from mom, half your DNA from dad. There's huge variety, huge chance for no individual is exactly the same, except in the case of identical twins. All right, lab safety. Hopefully you remember lab safety. If you are having struggles remembering what's important for lab safety, you can go to my website, which is sciencesfun.org, and then go to the flipped classroom videos, and then go to the beginning of the year videos, and you can watch both the lab safety video as well as the safety wrap, and those will be good ways, good reminders of what makes safe lab scenarios. Hopefully you've remembered that. We've practiced lab safety all year, so I'm not going to really go over that, but if you go to sciencesfun.org, go to the flipped classroom videos or flip videos, and then go to the first of the year, you should be able to find anything to help you review that. All right, good evidence and trade-off responses. Okay, if by now you don't know what good evidence is, I'm an epic failure as a teacher. Good evidence is evidence that you have acquired through data using your observation and senses from either a lab or from scientific research and reading. It's not an opinion. It's not just what one person thinks. You have data to prove it. Okay, so good evidence. Trade-offs, we've had a little more trouble with trade-offs. Not all of our rat seed responses are trade-offs. Quite often they're just rat C. So we restate answer 2 to 3 pieces of evidence and a conclusion, but we do have some trade-off responses. We restate answer, give some evidence, but then we also give a trade-off. So please make sure that you look while you are doing your extended responses and see if they say trade-off responses as well, because a trade-off is what you give up. So I'm going to give you a scenario where you have only $500. You can buy a new gaming system or you can buy a new iPad. And I know first response, especially for some of you boys and even some of the girls, is, oh, I'm going to buy a gaming system. But the other part of the question is, what would be most helpful for you and school? Well, at that point, probably you're going to have to say an iPad. Your evidence is going to be that there's lots of apps that can help you study, that it allows you to get on the internet and interact and find information, that you can do multiple assignments with the different programs that are on there. And because you only have a certain amount of money, you can't buy both. Well, what's the trade-off? Maybe it's not going to be as much fun. You certainly aren't going to get to buy your gaming system. So you've traded off the gaming system by making the choice to go with the iPad. So that's an example of evidence and trade-offs. And again, same thing with rat C. Hopefully, again, by now, you know you restate. Okay? Oops. So your first sentence is going to be that restate, and it's going to be that answer. That's going to all go in there. You're going to restate the question, then you're going to answer the question. Then you're going to give me at least 2, preferably 3 pieces of evidence. And then you've got to give me that closing sentence. Now, if you do this, 2 to 3 pieces of evidence, restate, answer, 2 to 3 pieces of evidence, and closing, you're going to get a 3 on your answer, which isn't bad. That's a 93%. However, if you want to get a 4, you've got to go above and beyond. So you've got to explain this T. We've gone over this with our science article reviews. We've gone over this with our analysis questions. Hopefully by now you understand that and are doing a good job at writing questions like that. Okay, finally, the last thing that you need to be able to do for these ECAs is to read data tables. So we're going to take a look at this data table, and it's on mineral properties. It's similar to what we did with are chemical properties of plastics. I will tell you here there is an error in the data. This should be dull and or glassy. So I'm going to put dull or glassy. So we look at this data table, and if we are going to try to use this data table to figure out whether a mineral is calcite or whether it is quartz, we're going to look and we're going to say, well, which of these characteristics or these properties are going to be helpful? We can look at color and say, oof, there's not too much variation. This could be red, this could be purple, this could be green, this could be yellow. Okay, so possibly if we get those colors. Well, but if they're white, we're out of luck. Transparency, translucent and transparent. Well, translucent, we can see light through it, but we can't really see an image. Transparent, we can see an image. So that might be helpful. Definitely luster is not going to help us. Dull or glassy, those are exactly the same for both of them. Okay, now here's something that looks like it's very different. Very different. So that's going to be very helpful. Hardness. This is a 3, this is a 7. We can really tell the difference. Streak color, not going to help us at all. Fizzing for reaction with acid, it does have a chemical reaction or no reaction. And then light refraction, when we refract light through it, look at an image, we might see 2, and we will always see a single image. So that might help, but it does just say sometimes. Okay, so we have this data. We know that hardness is going to be a really good help, reaction with acid. If we have clearly see 2 images, that's going to be helpful as well. Okay, so then we get this data table. This data table says, here we go. Let's see if we can bring this up just a little bit. First off, it's translucent. Okay, if we go back, translucent. Okay, translucent, if we looked right, translucent means it is calcite. Okay, then dull to glassy. Dull to glassy, okay, that doesn't help us. Hardness, between 3 and 5.5. Well, okay, right there. We know pretty for sure it's calcite. Because 3 to 5.5, small bubbles form. We look up here, react with acid, small bubbles form, and it does double refract. So we've got 4 very conclusive pieces of evidence. Well, that one maybe not so much, it's a little harder to tell. So if we were going to do our RAT-C to say we know, we would restate the unknown mineral is calcite. We've already restated and answered. Then we're going to give 2 to 3 pieces of evidence. We know this because when we tested its transparency, it was translucent, and calcite is translucent. We know that when we tested hardness, it ranked between 3.5 and 5.5, and the hardness of calcite is 3, and the hardness of quartz is 7, so it can't be quartz. Okay, that's a second piece of evidence. We also know it because it reacted with hydrochloric acid by small bubbles forming, and quartz does not react with hydrochloric acid. And our final piece of evidence, and now we're up to 4. Now we're up to 4 pieces of evidence, is that 2 images could be seen when we did light refraction. So for these reasons, here's my closing. So for these reasons, we know that the unknown mineral must be calcite. Now, what I just gave you was a 4. I gave you a 4 explanation. If you want to hear it again, listen to it, and that would be a 4 rather than a 3. Okay, so if you feel comfortable with these concepts, again, if you're not comfortable with this idea of explain why you chose your answer and why you did not the other, reviewing good experimental design, going back over your vocabulary, understanding evidence, being able to read tables, then you should be well prepared for this lab. Once you've reviewed it, write down any questions, and I'll be happy to go over the any questions you might have in class.